I'm going to be debunking this PBS video about Seth Rich. Now, I have to say, this is just a ridiculous case of bad logic. It's kind of embarrassing how bad this is. And look at this woman on the screen. I've seen her, I believe, host presidential debates. I can't remember her name. So she's putting her name behind this and reputation behind this, and PBS is putting their reputation behind this. The elementary logic errors they make in this video are so bad.
Now, how an unsolved murder in the nation's capital turned into a conspiracy theory.
What she means is, if you think Seth Rich was the leaker of Hillary's emails to Wikileaks, that's a conspiracy theory. And by conspiracy theory, she means untrue. And we're going to get to her reasoning later, and I'll show you why their reasoning is so flawed.
And then became a case study of how false news spreads. It underscores once again the problem of polarized politics and divided sources of information.
Divided sources of information? What does it even mean?
John Yang reports.
To the extent of my ability, I am not going to stop trying to find the truth.
The story of Seth Rich's death is a story of how fake news spreads from websites and online forums.
Wait, stop right here. When I first watched this, I didn't even notice this because it was so fast I couldn't even read it. Watch how fast they show these three quotes.
From websites and online forums like Reddit to primetime.
So that's pretty fast. But this is showing they know better than what they're saying. Or they should, and they're just doing terrible analysis. So WikiLeaks suggests murdered DNC staffer was source for leaks. So if WikiLeaks is suggesting it, that means he was the leak. Because they know who gave them the information. They've never been shown to release something falsely or say something falsely. So that's pretty reliable, much more reliable than these quote-unquote journalists. They're just speculating.
Like Reddit to primetime cable TV.
Another massive breaking news story. Explosive developments in the mysterious murder of former DNC staffer Seth Rich.
Early one morning last July, 27-year-old Rich was found fatally shot near his Washington, D.C. home. Politics had drawn the Omaha native to the city, and he was working at the Democratic National Committee when he died. The case is still unsolved. D.C. police theorize it was a botched robbery, the latest in a string of attacks in the neighborhood. As Rich's family and friends mourned, he became the subject of a baseless conspiracy theory. The claim was that he was the source of the DNC emails.
Baseless? WikiLeaks said Seth Rich was the leaker. That's like if somebody punched you in the face and you saw who punched you, and the police say, "Who punched you in the face?" And you say, "It was him." And they say, "Oh, that's baseless." That's baseless.
That WikiLeaks released later that month.
A private investigator says there is evidence to show Rich was communicating with WikiLeaks.
Last week, Fox's Washington station broadcast an interview with Fox News legal commentator Rod Wheeler.
Rod Wheeler wasn't just a Fox News commentator. He's also a private investigator.
You have sources at the FBI saying that there is information could link Seth Rich to WikiLeaks?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's confirmed.
2 days later, Wheeler backtracked, saying his statements were a miscommunication. But not before Trump ally Sean Hannity devoted a portion of his Fox show to the story, giving Wheeler a much bigger platform for his unsubstantiated claims.
I mean, I'm sure that's happened to most every news person. How is Sean Hannity supposed to know? I mean, he doesn't have firsthand knowledge where Rod Wheeler's getting his information. Rod Wheeler was a detective with the New York Police Department. So you would think, hey, I don't think he's just going to make something up. And apparently he did. More likely is what happened is that Rod Wheeler did have a source at the FBI. And then the story went viral. And then everybody's asking him about it and running the story. And what I think happened is that somebody at the FBI said, "Hey, Rod, you weren't supposed to say that. I told you that, and I didn't mean for you to go tell everybody that. Now we're in hot water over here." And probably put pressure on him to say, "Hey, you got to walk this back because you weren't supposed to say that." So Rod Wheeler went back on Hannity and he says, "I misspoke." And listen to his comments here. Does it seem like he misspoke?
You have sources at the FBI saying that there is information
For
that
sure.
could link Seth Rich to WikiLeaks?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's confirmed.
That doesn't seem like somebody misspeaking to me. He said pretty clearly, yes, there's people at the FBI who told me. But another reason I think that Rod Wheeler was telling the truth originally is because 3 months later, Seymour Hersh said the exact same thing as Rod Wheeler. Seymour Hersh is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He's been around for 30 plus years. And he said the exact same thing. He said, sources at the FBI told me that Seth Rich did give the emails to WikiLeaks. It wasn't Russia. That was made up. It was Seth Rich. And he said that on an audio recording. It got made public. I don't think Seymour Hersh meant for it to get public, but it went public. And then WikiLeaks got a hold of that recording, and they retweeted it. So they're basically saying, yes, Seth Rich was the source, not Russia. I'll put the link in the comments to that video of Seymour Hersh.
For some conservative commentators, retractions and fact checks have appeared to make little difference.
If we're talking about fact check, we can fact check what he just said. So he's basically saying that since Rod Wheeler walked back his statements, that also means that Seth Rich wasn't the leaker, because Rod Wheeler's statements supported the idea that Seth Rich was the leaker. But that's not logic. Just because one piece of evidence fails, that doesn't mean the entire narrative fails. It would be similar to the case with the Supreme Court nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. He had multiple women come forward and say, hey, he sexually assaulted us, Christine Blasey Ford being the foremost. And some of the other women that accused him basically admitted that they lied. So they walked back their statements. So since they walked back their statements, does that mean that Brett Kavanaugh didn't sexually assault anybody, since there was one or two women who retracted their accusations? No, that's ridiculous. So saying that Rod Wheeler's story was wrong, which it might be, even though I think it was true, and he walked it back, but let's just say it was wrong, and he did misspeak. That doesn't mean Seth Rich wasn't the leaker. That's ridiculous logic. They're saying since Rod Wheeler said this, and he walked it back, that means Seth Rich wasn't the leaker. That is terrible logic. All it means in that part of the story is discredited. And I'll grant that. It's not as credible as before he backtracked. But even if what he's saying is wrong, all it means is his part of the story is discredited. All the other stuff, Seymour Hersh, all the other stuff, WikiLeaks tweeting it out, WikiLeaks saying on multiple occasions it was Seth Rich, WikiLeaks on multiple occasions saying it was not Russia. Those are still pieces of evidence, and PBS is sweeping that under the rug.
Newt Gingrich on Fox and Friends this past Sunday.
We have this very strange story now of this young man who worked for the Democratic National Committee who apparently was assassinated at 4 in the morning, having given WikiLeaks something like 53,000 emails and 17,000 attachments. Nobody's investigating that.
There is no evidence for those claims.
There is evidence. WikiLeaks said it. Your own graphic from earlier said it. The one he played for half a second.
Alexios Manzarlis is at the Poynter Institute, a journalism school.
Basic journalistic principles weren't met, right? The story was run without the source being properly vetted.
Literally, PBS has been running the Russia conspiracy story on nothing. They had the Steele dossier completely unvetted. And when it was vetted, it was shown to be false. Yet PBS is still running the Russia conspiracy theory. And PBS wants to complain about somebody else running something that's unvetted?
And without the DC police or the Rich family being consulted.
What does it matter what the Rich family says? I mean, I'm sorry for their loss, but that's kind of irrelevant. So if they don't want it talked about, that means Seth Rich wasn't the leaker? That's stupid logic.
Analysts say it underscores the fragmented media world we live in.
The lesson here is that it's easy to find online and in this enormous wealth of information that there is around us, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of conspiracies, all kinds of hoaxes. If you are predisposed to think that something sketchy happened with the DNC and the leaks, then you are more likely to believe stories that aren't necessarily true, and as this one has been roundly debunked.
Has not been debunked. This gentleman needs to take a critical thinking class, because the only part that has been discredited is Rod Wheeler because he walked it back. That doesn't mean that Seth Rich wasn't the leaker.
But still a story that shows no signs of going away, at least in some circles. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm John Yang.
And then they end with the Seth Rich family pulling on the heartstrings there. So these guys at PBS, they present the case that because the Rod Wheeler story was discredited because he walked it back, that means the entire story of Seth Rich being the leaker is false. They're saying one piece of evidence was false. That means all the pieces of evidence are false, and that's wrong. But they base their entire story on that piece of bad logic, and then they jump off of that to say, oh, Sean Hannity's a conspiracy theorist, he's wrong. Newt Gingrich's conspiracy theory, he's wrong. And all these other people in other circles that believe this, they're wrong, based on their false logic. And then they play in the heartstrings to say not only are they wrong, but they're insensitive too. This is PBS. This isn't some like tiny little website somewhere. This is mainstream. This is government-funded propaganda. Fake news.